Before we begin the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built. As we share our own knowledge, teaching, learning and research practices within this university, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. Welcome to the second of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Knowledge Seminar Series run by the University Library. Held in conjunction with the Office of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Strategy and Services, this is the second in a series of 6 talks which will be held throughout the year. The series is presented by experts on a variety of subject areas, including history and language, cultural astronomy, connection to country, visual arts, medicine, and perspectives on gender. The University Library had 6 staff members participate in the university's Culturally Competent Leadership Program in 2017. They've gone on to form a cultural competence community of practice in the library and are proud to be presenting these seminars. The theme of knowledge sharing is something that we reflect on in libraries. After all, one of the essential roles we play is in connecting people to information. In this seminar series, we have the opportunity to investigate the role that others play in sharing knowledge, whether it be through embedding it in a school curriculum or how an item is displayed in a museum. Today's seminar focuses on cultural astronomy, and we'll be hearing from 3 fascinating presenters: Jimmy Smith, Bob Fuller, and Carla Guedes. I now leave you with Edward to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Diane. Jimmy Smith is an Aboriginal educator and cultural practitioner. He has extensive experience in teaching Aboriginal history, arts, culture and heritage, and has a particular passion for Aboriginal science and technology, including astronomy and traditional land usage. He is keen to share the strength of epistemologies and Aboriginal ways of knowing and doing, and does so in his roles at the Australian Museum and at the Department of Museums here at the University of Sydney. Please welcome Jimmy.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes? No? Yes? Okay. I'm a Wiradjuri Koori. I come from Irambi Mission, outside of a town called Cowra in central New South Wales. Yeah, I guess there's so much more about that I can say as to that intro that come from the Australian Museum. One of the many things that I didn't do was to bring an EMU caller. I meant to bring an EMU caller, but we'll get to that soon enough when we start to go through these slides. All right. As you can see with this map, this is the way it is, and it's the way it's been for a very, very long time in this country. 200 plus languages across Australia, and you add the dialects to those languages and the number skyrockets. So all the cultures are not the same, obviously, in all the languages, and the art. The art is the way that we write, and I'll show you a little bit more about the art as we move through this presentation. So all the stories about astronomy are not the same as well. I'll hit on a couple of them from around the country, but for the most part I'll try and stick to here in the southeast of the country. All right. Wiradjuri country is here. So it's the largest tract of land on the eastern seaboard. Goes from Gunnedah in the north to Wagga Wagga in the south. And when Blaxley and Wentworth or Lawson were shown the way over these mountains out here, they entered Wiradjuri lands. They were there for 12 months and then it was on. And so a big part of history that a lot of people don't know about out there revolves around the town of Bathurst. I think it's the first inland city. However, that's another area altogether. So in culture, the culture of the land that we live in, everything up there comes from down here. All of the stories, they all originate here on the earth. And by the way, I should do a quick acknowledgement of country as well. I would also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would like to acknowledge their connection to their land, to their waterways, and to their community, and indeed to the other 28 tribal groups that make up the Eora Nation. I would like to acknowledge their history, and I would like to acknowledge their elders, past and present. So, this is so much a part of our world view, and it all seems to keep coming back to astronomy, because we are seasonal people. We move with the seasons. We weren't nomadic. This is one of the illusions of colonialism that said we didn't own the land. We owned the land all right. We still do. And we just moved around the land. We weren't, and the language of walkabout, it's a myth. You know, we didn't go walkabout. We were moving to another area of our estates. We knew where we were going. And it was, more times than not, it was about not only the renewal of the food resources from where we'd moved from, but also to an area where the food was already renewed. So fresh food all the time. Awesome stuff. And that produced some very, very healthy people. All right. I hope I don't have to keep turning around to look at this all the time. It's going to be a little bit distracting. So I'll try and do it like this. All right. What you know is the Milky Way. We know it as the EMU in the sky. And this is an awesome bit of photography of the EMU in the sky. Right up the top there is the EMU's head and beak and the long neck, and here's the body here. And it's the only time that the EMU flies, when it flies across the night sky. You won't see it here in Sydney because obviously because of all the lights. They tone the whole night sky down. However, it is what it is, and if you're lucky to get out into the country, get over west of the mountains, you will see it at night time. And from about 9 o'clock, you'll see this much. If you get up around 4 o'clock, you'll see it from there right down to here, and it goes from one horizon to the next, so it fills the night sky. And this is what it looks like a bit more with an outline of the EMU. This light in here is just a little bit distorted, maybe because of the light around here and from outside. It's so much darker, and just as important, it relates to engravings that are up in Guringai National Park at a place called the Alvina Trail. If you contact me sometime about a tour, I might be able to take you up there. Awesome place to go to. It also has a bunch of other really deadly engravings as well. But that's what it looks like up here on this one, and a lot of loss of light here. But there's the head and the body as well. So in March, when the EMU sits above Sydney, Koori people would know this is the time to go out and collect emu eggs. And what they would do, they would go out in a family group with children and show children how to do this as well, because they've already been taught the children the stories of the emu in the sky. and 101 other stories that come with cultural astronomy. So when they come across an emu, it's a male emu that sits on the nest and incubates the eggs. They would sit maybe 20 metres away in the bush, and they would have that thing that I was talking about that I didn't bring, that I forgot. An emu caller. It's a branch of a tree about this long, hollowed out by white ants, and what they would do with that, they would hit it on one end. And you can do this with a vacuum cleaner when you go home. You want to hear the pop pop sound that it makes, but this is the sound that comes out of the emu's long neck. The male emu hears this, and the first thing it thinks is, there's another emu here, I need to get up and protect the eggs. While the emu's looking for this other emu, Koris come around with dilly bags and coolamans and collect the eggs. But one of the many other great things about this story, not only does it start by the constellation of the emu in the sky, they do not take all of the eggs, because Koori people, native people right across this country, we are part of the cycle of life, and we don't take everything. Being part of it, we're major conservationists, huh? And being part of the cycle of life, we allow the emu eggs to hatch and the chicks to grow up and continue that cycle of life. So it's a great story. And then guess what's for tea that night? Emu eggs. Big stuff. High protein diet. We had a very, very high protein diet. We didn't go to Coles or Woolies, we went out into the bush. And this high protein diet created some awesome specimens of humanity. And we were anything except what we were portrayed to be. We were awesome warriors, very fit, very healthy and mobile people. But once we were put on missions, our lifestyle was a sedentary lifestyle, and they gave us this European rations, this garbage food, which broke down our physiology in a big way, and it continues to do so today, which creates some of the worst health statistics on the planet. From all this really high protein diet to this awesome specimens of humanity to being reduced down to that level, which is not a very good thing. However, there are a lot of us who still kick on, and a lot of those are first grade footballers right around the country, and the biggest game in the country, Aussie rules, Marn Group, it's a Koori game. Huh? Whether they'll acknowledge that or not, I don't know, but I certainly do. This is the engraving I'm talking about, up in the Alvina Trail. Yeah, you really should look me up in the Metropolitan Land Council and line up a tour, and I'll take you up there. And also to another very spectacular engraving site called Moon Rock. All right, this one comes from down in Victoria. Word are you wrong, people? Their arrangement depicts the positions of the sunrise at the equinox and the solstice. So like all astronomy, it has to be very, very precise. So and we have the solstice coming up next week. And just as important, not only will we read the night skies and talked about it in our stories, but we also positioned the sun where it came up at these times of the year during the equinox and the solstice. To each, the solstice is 21st of June and the 21st of December. By the way, we didn't run on a Roman calendar. We had our own seasonal calendar. So a lot of people are not aware of that. They go, oh, gee whiz, I didn't know that. It's very real. But the precision of the elders and the ability, the capacity to pass on these star stories and create this amazing stone arrangement here. It probably just looks like a bunch of stones to people who are not aware of what's going on in the Australian bush, and that's a lot of people. It's kind of like you walk along, oh, a snake. The Kooris will see it well and truly before a gutty comes along. So yeah, this one's down in Victoria. And just as important, with these solstices, and the one coming up next week, this marks not only the change of the middle of the year from winter into summer, it also marks the beginning of festivals, Koori festivals, right across the country. A lot of them are being renewed, like the Bogon Moth Festival down that was held down around the Alps around Canberra, but they're renewing it down at Albury. The same with the Bunya Nut Festival up west of Brisbane, Garma up at Eurocentric, Barunga south east of Catherine. All of these festivals, and they went on all over the country. Same here, it was a festival of the eels. By the way, Sydney is a place of eel dreaming, just in case you don't know. And it's one of the few eel dreaming places in the country. It's very important. And it just happens to be the biggest city in the country. So it's a very, very special place. One of the best cities on the planet too. One of the most beautiful, and as you can see outside today, you wouldn't be anywhere else. Not me anyhow. I'm very lucky to be here. And in the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's always good to be able to respect other people's lands when you're in their country, because this is where we live and this is where we make our living. Big business, huh? We're not out in the country somewhere. Or in Melbourne or Hobart. Be a lot colder down there. All right. So these festivals, they're very important. So much goes down at these festivals. Marriages are arranged, conflicts are sorted out, ceremonies are conducted. All manner of very, very important happenings go on at these festivals. And just as important, it's worthwhile mentioning about the festivals and the arranged marriages. And this relates to how big and fit and healthy the people were, is the marriage laws, and the arranged marriages were made by elders. So there was 2 sections right across the country, and you could only marry into that other section. So this created the purest gene pool on the planet. This is an island continent, and I don't think too many other people can claim that. And indeed, it was a Garden of Eden, and then came the British. Eh? All right. Yeah. So this one, this talks about an eclipse. In culture, there's so many things to say about astronomy. I guess one of the first things that I should say is that the sun is female. Unlike the West, depicts it as in that's male, and the moon in culture is the male. But in the West, the moon is female. But in culture of the land, it is not that way. So when the sun rises in the morning, she throws out her ochres, and you see all these beautiful sunsets. And when she gets over to the other side there in Yamaji country, Noongar country, WA, she throws out all the ochres again, and then you see the beautiful sunsets that go over in that part of the world. Then she goes underground, comes back up over this side and begins the journey again. So that's a quick one about the sun and the moon. Because this one is about eclipses, the sun and the moon. And in culture again, it's about, as I said, they're male and female. So when it blacks out like this, it's the sun and the moon. It's celestial amour. Huh? They're making love. And this is what's just about depicted in these engravings here. There's a few of this particular one. up in Guringai and further down closer to Sydney itself. So, the beginning of an eclipse, huh? The diamond ring corona. Just before the totality begins, and also as it ends, the corona appears during the diamond ring effect. Brilliant ruby red prominence shine along the edges of the sun with a laser-like intensity. They're a great thing to behold. Obviously you don't look at it too much, that it's going to damage your eyes. But this is the beginning. This is the totality, or whatever, when it's full on. And this one is the end of the eclipse and the diamond ring effect again here on the corona. This is Moon Rock that I spoke about a little bit earlier. And in the culture of the land, again, you can't quite see it because of the light in here. But there's a boomerang that I've got my finger going around there. And by Amy, the creation spirit, threw the boomerang into the sky and created the first new moon. And it grew from there. And here is the first moon, and actually there's about 8 moons up here on this rock. If you contact me again, we can take you up there. It's an amazing place to go to, it truly is. I haven't been to many that have this kind of power about it. But this is the first one, and you can just see the boomerang, the new moon there, and then it goes in a direction up that way around the rock. And it's also, again, like the eclipses, it's about fertility as well. Not only amongst the people, but amongst marine life. Up there's a lot of eels. Again, this is a place of eel dreaming. And this is the time when they spawn on the full moon as well. Indeed, marine life right across the planet spawns at this time of the moon. So again, this is part of the cycle of life, and we're part of that cycle. This one is over in Nunga country, South Australia, and it depicts the phases of the moon. It starts here and goes right into the middle to the full moon, and then the waning on the other side of the moon there. So all across this country, we're not only stargazers, we're astronomers. All right, so burn-offs, a seasonal thing. They're conducted at specific times of the year, and if you've ever heard of people who are trying to practice burn-off without consulting the local people, like over in Noongar country, southwest WA, I think it was about 2014, they had tried to do a burn-off. What they didn't take into account was the roaring 40s that come across from South Africa. And when they came, that burn-off just went bloof and picked the flames up, and they lost a lot of property and a lot of livestock as well. So it certainly pays to consult the locals when you're doing any kind of thing like that. And as you know, bushfires devastate this country. Down a place called Cockatoo not too long ago, it just about wiped the place out. All right, and again, up here, they take the family and show them how to do it. So the teaching is passed on, and it's about ways of knowing and doing. And just as important, once a little bit of hunting as the fire is flushing out the wildlife. So multitasking, we've been doing it for a long, long time. And telcos use that kind of language. We've been doing it for ages. We're awesome people. We've survived colonisation by the British. This is no walk in the park, I tell you. All right. So another big thing about full moons is a big time for ceremonies, huh? And for feasting and for gatherings, and just as important, you probably find that a lot of those festivals that I was talking about, they happen around. They start around the new moon and lead up to the full moon. So yeah, we're on new moon at the moment. So yeah, new starts, new chi, and everything else that comes with new starts. Great way to go. All right, fishing again, new moons and full moons, huh? Fishing by torchlight. Knowledge of fishing by the phases of the moon. The torchlights, they're made out of banksias. They are tied together and they are smeared with goanna fat and or emu oil, and they take them out on the water like this. Not only that, but you find your way through the bush with them as well. And just as important, again, talking about the health of the Koori people, the fish should be brought straight in, and not that they were going to wait it or anything, they were cooked virtually straight away. So all that protein goes straight into the Koori's body. So big, fit, healthy people. All right, this comes from, I don't know whether any of you were lucky enough to get down to Canberra to see this exhibition called Songlines. Very fortunate people if you did, because it was a cracking exhibition. This particular one is about Seven Sisters. And this dreaming, it not only goes across this part of Australia, it's up here in Arnhem Land, it's down here, and it's here in Central Australia as well. It's also in Northern Asia, Korea, and I believe it's called Subaru. And you look at the Subaru emblem and it has 6 stars on it. There is actually 7 in the constellation. And in the dreaming stories, the Alteringa stories, it is the 7th sister, which is the youngest sister. But in the night sky, you can't see it. She's very faint, but she's certainly there. And in this particular story, the one that I know, the stories vary from Central Australia, up here in Arnhem Land, but the one that I know comes from over here, and it comes out of Roebourne. In the Alteringa, the dreaming, there is a group of women came out of here, and they started this journey eastward, and as they were travelling, they created the landscapes. They had sacred digging sticks, and they created sacred waterholes as well. They were also travelling, meeting the people as they travelled, and they were giving them language, and they were changing their own language as they travelled. So this was an awesome part of the story of 7 Sisters dreaming. They were travelling further this direction here, and they came across a group of men, and they'd never seen men before, and men had never seen women before. So the first thing the men wanted to do was to grab the women, but these women were powerful women. Indeed, all native women who go through the education system in this country are powerful women. It's men's business and women's business. Women have their own ceremonies that they go through, and in this they are empowered. Our education system is central to why we've lived for so long, and men's business and women's business is huge. So when these men tried to grab hold of these women, the women opened up on them with their digging sticks and left the men in a trail of blood. And then there was one of them who wanted to continue the pursuit, and the journey continued right across, go back, to here, and this man's name was Yerla, and he pursues them, and he catches up with them at a waterhole, and he tries to grab hold of the little sister, and sisters being who they are, what they do. Some have the wisdom, some don't. So the other 6, they headed off, and they didn't get far, and they realised we've got to go back and get our sister. So they come back, and they tell you, look, we'll all be your wives. And they were just young, and they were just waiting for an opportunity to continue on their journey. So Yerla goes off to collect some firewood, and out in this part of the world there's not much firewood. This is desert country. And while he's out looking for firewood, the sisters head off and they continue their journey. Yerla tracks them, follows them, and to the next waterhole, and this process continues. Several more encounters with Yerla until they get to a stage where the elder sister's saying, listen, we have to do something about this guy. We can't continue on doing what we're doing, creating the landscape and the like, while Yerla's in pursuit. So they'd had enough, and from here they fly off into the night sky, and they are there in the form of what you may know as the Pleiades. However, Yerla, being a hard-headed, obstinate man, he pursues them into the night sky, and in culture, he would be known as Venus. It's in Greek astronomy, I believe he's known as Orion, the hunter. So the stories go very similar right around the planet. And the stories continue to be told, and if you look at the night sky and Venus, Yerla, he catches up to the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, throughout his journey across the sky. But always, he gets so close, and then the Pleiades moves away. So the journey, the story continues in that way of what went on here, over in the deserts, the central deserts of WA. Continues in the night sky. And songlines. These are about travels. This is about travelling. And the way that they passed on the knowledge was through to sing the stories. And that's why they're called songlines, of how you travel. This comes from an exhibition called Uwarakuju, the Canning Stock Route, which was at the Australian Museum in 2012. It went for 14 weeks. It was a big exhibition. There was 97 paintings in this one. This one was the bulk of the 97 paintings were done by women. And in this particular one, again, this is about ceremony, and this is women's business. So men had to leave the area. They weren't allowed within 10, 15 k's of the women while they were conducting this ceremony. So there would have been about several women doing the painting, and there'd have been several women on the side singing, and also another group of women who were dancing the stories that I've just told you about Yerla and his pursuit of the 7 sisters. So it was big business going down, so all that spiritual energy went into that painting. And this painting is huge. It probably sits from the floor here to maybe the top of this screen. So it's not small by a long shot, and it's probably as wide as the screen within the screen there. The big red that you see is the Uwarakuju. Uwarakuju means one road, and out there is only one road. But an awful lot of pathways that the Māori people had created, and the Yamaji people whose lands this Uwarakuju passed through. And on both sides there are waterholes. And As you may be aware, in the desert, water is life. There is no life without water in the desert. So central to their world. And Canning and his men and the colonial governments of WA at this time, this is 1910, they wanted the water hole for the cattle. So it's a good reason not to eat meat. And the markets were in Kalgoorlie and Perth at that time. Yeah, I didn't eat meat for a long time after this. They did a lot of bad things to get these water holes. So from Roebourne, and this is the landscape out there. So from Roebourne to Yindabandi, and as they travelled through all the countries, they changed their languages. They were meeting the peoples. This is one of the many, many beautiful paintings that were part of that exhibition down there. And this particular one, I believe, relates to water holes and bush foods. It's unfortunate that this light is the way it is, because these are very vibrant, beautiful colours, and the light kind of washes them out. This is another beautiful one from that exhibition, and all these U-shapes around here. So this is a ceremony. This is about a ceremony. And here, these circles, these are water holes. So all the U-shapes, they are people. And just in case you don't know, the reason why they're depicted in these U-shapes is when you sit down in the desert sands and you get up, this is the shape that's left in the sand. So this is the way they depict people. All right, just a couple of resources that you may want to look into. This one here, Dark Sparklers, by Bill Harney and Huey Cairns by the look of it. If you want to further that. Bill Harney was, I think, probably the first native Australian to be invited to go to NASA to talk about his star dreaming stories. And this particular one here, EMU Dreaming, by Bill Norris, I think his name is. I've read it about, I don't know, 8 or 9 times, and I think about the 9th time I understood it. So it's only a small booklet, you can get through it in about half an hour, but for some reason it just did not compute. It did not relate, because it was coming from another perspective, a very, almost a scientific perspective, whereas we are much more practical about the whole situation, and science kind of, in astronomy, it doesn't kind of leave me out there, but I certainly prefer much more in the way that we perceive the night skies. All right, and the last slide I have is Uluru, the centre of our universe, huh? And I spoke to a group of astronomers, the Australian Museum, and out in Central Australia. If you ever get out there, Alice Springs, or even out to Uluru, you have a look at the night sky. It is absolutely unbelievable. And I was trying to explain a feeling that I had, and I wasn't sure on their perspective and what they'd seen of the night sky from wherever they came. They came from North America. But what I was trying to explain to them was, this is the biggest night sky I've ever seen. This is the most stars that I've ever seen, and just as important, the clearest. And somehow I couldn't verbalise what I was feeling to get across to them, which was got an awful lot across to them, but that bit I didn't know where I succeeded. If you're ever lucky enough to drive from Camberwell to Tennant Creek, try and do it at night, because there's a sign when you cross into the Northern Territory border there at Camberwell that says this is comet country. And if you do travel across, that's all you'll see for the next 8-hour drive to Tennant Creek is comets flying across the night sky. It is spectacular. So I hope you get that opportunity in this lifetime to get to Uluru, to get to see the night sky out there in Central Australia, and just as important, a great way to get there is probably to drive across that particular part of Australia. You really realise that you are on a planet because you can see from one horizon to the next. It's a pretty awesome place, just like the country. All right, folks, I think that's about it for me.
I'd just like to thank you very much for that talk. It was really awesome, inspiring. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a voice problem, but most of us here should recall, the Apollo missions that eventually did land people on the moon, briefly, came back. But the lead up to that was prior to 1969. John Glenn was the first embodied human to circumnavigate.
I can't quite hear you.
You can't hear me?
No, now I can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Right.
John Glenn was the first human being to get in a spacecraft and go around the planet in orbit.
Uh-huh.
And in the movie The Right Stuff, which is about that
Absolutely, yes.
Hollywood story about it, there's a reference in there, very, very marginal reference in there, some Aboriginal people in the outback of Australia somehow knowing something's going on. You got a story about that at all?
That's great that somebody else saw that. I thought I was the only person who saw that in The Right Stuff. Then when the Space Capsule lost control, and somewhere out here in this vast continent there was a tribal man, and he was singing over a fire, and when the more he sang, the spirit and the sparks from the fire went up, and they kept going up, and they went right up into space, and somehow they righted this space capsule. I don't have the story to it, but it was pretty spectacular sort of stuff, and that's all I can remember about that movie, is that traditional man singing around a campfire. And I think for some reason it was in the Northern Territory. That was what I picked up out of that. But great, somebody else saw it. I thought I was the only person who saw that. That was excellent. All right. And yeah, I can't put a story to it, I'm sorry, apart from that. So it came from somewhere, huh? Hollywood picked it up. It was great.
Anybody else for any questions for James? No? Okay. Well, look, thank you so much once
No
again,
worries.
James.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time.
Good on you.
Our second speaker for today is Bob Fuller, a PhD candidate in ethnography at the School of Humanities and Languages within the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of New South Wales. Bob has a background in anthropology and archaeology, and is actively involved in research for cultural astronomy. Bob has been active in outreach to Indigenous communities through lectures and various articles, and was the instigator of the successful documentary on Yuwali astronomy, Star Stories of the Dreaming. Today, Bob will be exploring with us the astronomy of the Aboriginal peoples of the New South Wales coast. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, John. What I'd like to talk about a little bit too is Indigenous knowledge systems, because the theme for this series is Indigenous knowledge. So I'll go into that a little bit, and then I'll bring in the cultural astronomy side of it as well. So first of all, what is cultural astronomy? It's broken up into four disciplines, really. Archaeoastronomy, which is the astronomy of pre-literate peoples, in other words, where we don't have any records. Stonehenge is a good example. Ethnoastronomy, which is the astronomy of first peoples, indigenous peoples of the world. Historical astronomy, which is more or less Western astronomy and how it has progressed from the early days. And geomythology, which is a field where they look at geological events and how they end up in stories. So there's quite a bit of that in Australia as well. So what's ethnoastronomy? Well, it's pretty simple. It's just going out and yarning with people I think Uncle Jimmy will know what I'm talking about. Really, that's what I do. I look in literature, but I also spend a lot of time talking to people about their culture and their stories. Let's get into Indigenous knowledge, though. Indigenous knowledge is quite different in the way it organizes knowledge compared to Western science. Indigenous knowledge also looks at knowledge and life in a very holistic way. In other words, it includes spiritual and material aspects of life as well. Indigenous knowledge relies on intuition and evidence of the senses. In other words, it's based on observation. And it's a closed system as well, in the sense that once a story has been established and people have looked at an observation and said, okay, this means this, then it tends to stay that way unless somebody comes along and has a completely different approach to it. Western science is very much open to different theories and alternatives. Indigenous knowledge also has the capability of filling in a lot of gaps in Western education, research, and scholarships, and particularly in the ethical and knowledge areas. And we see this all the time, basically. People like Bruce Pascoe, who is looking at how Aboriginal people basically lived with the land, and that's the type of knowledge that sort of fills in the Western system. So what is Indigenous knowledge? Well, here's an example of Eurocentric scholarship. Basically, if you go to a university, ethics is in the School of Humanities. If you're doing astronomy, it's in the Faculty of Science. If you look at it from an Indigenous knowledge point of view, ethics and astronomy, that's one field. In other words, astronomy, as Uncle Jimmy said, is basically has a very strong meaning for people. To give you an example of this dualism between Western science and Indigenous knowledge, some of you may be aware of the Swede Linnaeus, who did the biological classification system, which looks like that, leading from kingdoms to species. But what's interesting is that Linnaeus got most of his ideas from the Sami people of northern Scandinavia. They had knowledge systems and they classified animals and plants. And Linnaeus basically borrowed a lot of their approach to that as well. So that's a bit of a comparison. Another comparison is the seasons. And from an Indigenous point of view, once again, we talk about the Seven Sisters. The Seven Sisters are also, besides having a cultural story, as was explained in the songline, they also are very important for many people in determining the seasons. And what happens is when the Seven Sisters first appear around October and November in the Northeast, that is telling people that summer's coming. So certain resources are available, and you should do this and you should do that. Later in the year, when they're disappearing in the evening in the west, well, that's telling people that winter's coming, and you should prepare for winter. Now, if you look at the Western system, we know seasons as based on the tilt of the Earth and its orbit around the sun. Now, the question is, which one is more useful to somebody who's living in the continent of Australia? Do they need to know how the Earth is tilted? No, they need to know that the Seven Sisters are telling them summer's coming or winter's coming. So that's a bit of an explanation of the comparison between Indigenous knowledge and Western science or Western knowledge. So where does cultural astronomy fit into Indigenous knowledge? You've got these different areas: environmental, economic, social, language, customs, religion, and art. Well, the answer is it's part of all Indigenous culture. In other words, every part of Indigenous culture, there is some connection to the sky. So, use my PhD project as an illustration. I'm doing, as Trevor said, a study of the astronomy and songline connections of the Aboriginal people of the New South Wales coast, the saltwater people. So, trying to basically make a collection of the knowledge, astronomical knowledge of Aboriginal communities on the coast, and using that data, that information, to link to the knowledge and stories to songlines and dreaming tracks along the coast as well, which we know exist. The area of the study is basically from the Queensland border to the Victorian border and back to the ranges, to the dividing range. And within that, we have quite a few language groups as well as a lot of communities. So what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for evidence of a link between the communities, both physically and in their ethnoastronomy, their cultural astronomy, and trying to do it through the songlines and dreaming tracks. Now, some of these songlines are known, some are being guessed at, and some are actually incorporated into the national parks, such as the Benji Dreaming Track down the south coast. They're there, it's just a matter of trying to find them. So what are songlines and dreaming tracks? David Maljarli, who was an elder from the Kimberley, drew up this image of songlines woven into the Australian continent. And as you can see, basically they cover the whole continent and they go just about every direction. Now, some of these are major songlines where there's a major story connected to it. Some may just be local stories or local songlines, but they're pretty much everywhere. And I think what's a good example is Auntie Rhoda Roberts did this little clip a couple of years ago for Vivid, and I think it gives you a bit of an idea of what songlines are all about.
Back in the old ways, the ancestral creation spirits created the songlines. They are a reflection not only of the earth but also the sky, the cosmology and how we navigate. In the past, today and for the future, the four cardinal points of the Southern Cross connect us to our law, our moral society, our systems of where we belong, our ceremony, kinship, and why we look after country. You can travel the songline, and it's called a songline because you actually sing up country through chants and rituals that occur along the way. If you were to look at them from an aerial view, it would remind you of a fishing net. The lines are connected. They're our trade routes, our dreaming tracks, our ancient knowledge. So if you look at the diamonds that are formed within that net, they are all the clan groups. And so you can see how we're connected right across this vast country. It's an oral archive of our history and mapping of country. Without songlines, we don't exist as a whole. We would become separate and singular. Our ancient culture has always been here, has always shared stories and welcomed others onto our country.
So what's the methodology of my study? How am I doing this? It's basically two parts: an ethno-historical literature survey, and this is just looking at all the literature since 1788, basically, to try to find the information I'm looking for on stories and on songlines and dreaming tracks. And to date, I've probably looked at about 1,500 different sources in libraries around Australia. I'm also doing an ethnographic collection of stories and cultural knowledge from participants who are identified with the specific saltwater communities on the New South Wales coast. And of course, that's what I'm doing as a PhD in ethnography. To date, I've got 20 communities along the coast who have decided to join in with the project, and there's over 30 participants who are involved in having a yarn with me. So the results so far in the literature database, I've found somewhere around 250 stories or cultural references. And talking to people, I've been able to record about 150 stories or cultural references as well. And I've been able to identify several major songlines and dreaming tracks geographically, and in some cases with the stories that are connected with them. And the way I will be analyzing it, or am analyzing it, is two ways. First of all is thematically. I'm looking at themes in the stories, and I'm basically linking those themes to the language groups of the communities that the stories come from. Here's an example from the Sydney literature that was done some time ago, but only from the literature, not from talking to people. The other method, which has not yet been attempted, is phylogenetic mytheme analysis. And this is a fairly new sort of technique which has been pioneered by a Frenchman, which uses the genetic techniques and computer methodology to try to track changes in a story over distance. And basically, through doing that, in his case, he's been able to identify the source and how a story actually traveled. Whether this is going to work here or not, I don't know. I have some stories that have got variations, but whether that's going to work, that'll only be shown when I've finished my evaluation. So, what's the study likely to find? The saltwater communities of the New South Wales coast were very heavily disrupted by colonization and later by the Aborigines Protection Board and everything else. They do have a strong connection to the astronomy and cosmology through their stories and songlines, but one of the problems is that the stories were connected to country, and once you lose your country, you often lose your stories. Another finding is that songlines and dreaming tracks were a major feature, particularly running north-south along the coast. And they're similar to the ones in the center of Australia, but just different stories, different features. And I'm pretty sure that like physical goods, stories were clearly traded along the trading routes and songlines. So an early result, this is one of the dreaming tracks which I've pretty well identified now. It's called the Black Swan dreaming track. It runs from Sydney up almost to the Queensland border, possibly further. And at the moment I have a very, very limited story to go with it, but I'm talking to some people who may have more of the story. The other thing I've done quite recently is Uncle Jimmy mentioned the Bunya Festival up in southeast Queensland, where Aboriginal people traveled from hundreds and hundreds of kilometers all around the southeast and Queensland to go there every 3 years to participate in the Bunya harvest. We've known that people traveled from, say, the Northern Rivers area up there every 3 years, but we didn't really know how. And I started working on this quite recently and going through a lot of the literature and a few hints by some knowledge people. I think I've been able to work out the route that they actually followed from around central Northern Rivers area near Nimbin up into Queensland. And I've just done a little clip of a fly-through of this route so you can get an idea of actually how people would have traveled in those days. There's Nimbin. And they turn north to pass behind Wollongong or Mount Warning. This is all fairly open country. And the line you can see up there is a dividing range, the white line. And at this stage, they're heading for Mount Durgan, which is just that little green pointer up there. That's also one of their culture heroes. And they cross over the ranges right here, drop down into a valley. They're now into Queensland. And they turn up here shortly and start heading for Bow Desert. And there's several different routes from Bow Desert up to the Bunya Festival. So, as a last comment, research, ethics, and cultural competence. This is a bit of a segue to my colleague Carla's talk on cultural competence, and something that Linda Smith, who I was forced to read a couple of times when I first got into this field, said sort of comes into it here. And that's this quote here: use humility, clear spirit, good heart, and be aware of particularly cultural baggage when you're doing this type of research. Right.
Thanks, Bob. That was really interesting and thoughtful. Your research is great. Part of my research is into the traditional Chinese idea of dragon veins, which is associated with ridge lines and watercourses. Just following that, the pictorial, the video, it didn't seem to be, the songlines didn't seem to be associated necessarily with each. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, that's a bit of a question. I've read in the literature that people back in the 1800s reported that Aboriginal people, when doing these long routes, would travel on ridgelines because, according to the person who wrote it, who was not Aboriginal, that it was easier walking. But I've done a bit of bushwalking, and ridgelines are oftentimes pretty difficult place to walk. I tend to think, and as you saw on that fly-through, that they would take the easiest route, which would be, in some cases, along water courses. Other cases, it could be ridgelines. There's one point there where they have to cross the divide, which is about 1,000 meters, and that's pretty tough walking straight up over the divide at that particular point. Songlines and traveling routes could be two different things, but I suspect, and maybe somebody can correct me who's Indigenous, that often traveling routes come first and the song for that route is added later, and the story goes with it, because they would first have to more or less break the route and find their way to where they're supposed to be going. But there's so many different methods around the world. You have ley lines in the UK, and I think there's other types of tracks as well in different parts of the world that I'm not really sure whether it's a standard sort of method or not.
Thank you. That was very, very inspiring. I read an article recently about how many Aboriginal pathways, whether they're songlines or trade routes, sort of coincide with modern stock routes and modern roads, partly simply because they're the way that Europeans observed easy ways of movement as well. Some of them, I wondered if you comment whether or not you found similar kind of correspondence with the East Coast. Yeah.
I did. In fact, you're probably talking about some things I wrote in the conversation. When I was doing a master's at Macquarie, I was working with the Uwaliye people up in, around Lightning Ridge and Gaduga in that area, and Giller Michael Anderson, who's Uwaliye knowledge man, culture man, basically told me about some routes that ran from that area up into Queensland to various ceremonial places, including the Bunya Festival. And he showed me how people were taught to travel those routes, which was actually using a pattern of stars. And the pattern of stars was actually not something that you used to walk under at night. It was a memory aid to memorizing the route. The interesting thing is when I was doing, looking at all these routes, I just happened to overlay them over a Google Maps. And surprisingly enough, all the routes more or less fitted onto the highway system. And I think since I've been talking to people about that, since I've had so many people tell me, yes, this road and that road that would have been an Aboriginal route. My theory was that in his case that somebody like Mitchell, who was the first person up through that area of northern New South Wales, he did have an Aboriginal guide, but the guide was from down here. He would have probably had a local person tell him or tell his guide how to go north into Queensland, and they would have followed that route. And then later on, the first drovers would have come through. They would have followed Mitchell's instructions, and then of course the settlers would come along with their wagons, and wagons lead to roads, and dirt roads turn to highways. Seems like a lot of Australia's road system was probably based on Aboriginal pathways, which could be songlines as well.
Thank
you. As an Aboriginal person, we not only walk this land, we also fly in this land, actually. We can fly when we're dreaming to where we want to go. So I've done it a few times. I've actually flown in my dreaming through to where I live. So we not only walk this land, we can fly in our dreaming, we can fly with, and you can also see where you fly, on this land. So yeah, I'm just going to let you know anyway.
A few years ago, I might have been a bit skeptical, but once again, Gillar, I was asking him one day, why does Aboriginal paintings of country appear to be so geographically accurate? In other words, if you look at a painting of waterholes and songlines or something like that, it's just like a map. And he said,
yeah. We love our land very much. We also looked after. We want to make sure it's here for the return of life.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. And of course, what Gillar said, of course, we know how the land looks, we can fly. So I can't argue against that.
Okay, thank you once again, Bob. Thank you.
So our third speaker is Carla Guedes, Master's by Research student and academic tutor from, again, the University of New South Wales. So Carla previously worked in the communication industry as both a journalist and then a creative director, and she now turned her attention to studying Australian Indigenous peoples and cultural astronomy. So in her talk, Carla will be talking to us about cultural confidence for astronomers who develop astronomical facilities in Indigenous sacred lands. So please welcome Carla.
Firstly, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. As I share my research within this university, may I also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. Thank you for having me here today. Let me see if I know how to work with this. So my name is Carla, and my research is about exploring cultural astronomy for, cultural competence for astronomers. So over the last 40 years, there has been substantial conflict between Indigenous people wanting to control and protect their lands and Western astronomers who wish to build research facilities on those lands. So my research explored the origin of those conflicts, the consequences of those conflicts for both Indigenous peoples and astronomers, and how can those conflicts be softened or maybe stopped in the future. So, in all of these long-lasting and diplomatically exhausting conflicts between Indigenous people and astronomers, the focus of the problem seems to have been twofold. Cultural incompatibilities around the use of the land and the meaning of sacred site for the Indigenous community, and the advancement of scientific and commercial progress for the astronomers. Both communities have been unable to negotiate an effective agreement between them, and when astronomers tried to protect both their projects and build an appropriate relationship with the Indigenous people, they had no culturally appropriate strategy to do so. Astronomers are often accused of being culturally insensitive, and this often leads to costly construction delays and ruined financial partnerships within institutions considering the investment in observatories built in Indigenous lands. Major concerns focused on issues like cultural appropriation, communication barriers, and difficulties in establishing correct and positive social, cultural, and political relationships within the Indigenous communities. Consequently, these issues reflect poor cultural competence on the part of astronomers. But I'm optimist. The encounters between astronomers willing to develop astronomical projects in Indigenous lands and the Indigenous peoples owners of the lands can be improved if Western astronomers improve their cultural knowledge. Since many Indigenous cultures are oral, a majority of things written about them is biased and influenced by Western culture. The dominant discourses in astronomy have been situated in the Western experience. Western astronomers have constructed and controlled most dimensions of astronomy, from the interpretation and presentation of the sky to funding and participating in scientific research. It is therefore not surprising that predominantly Western men have also written most of the literature on astronomy. Consequently, most academic analyses and discussions of astronomy have focused on the experiences and interpretation of Western astronomers, and this might be the origin of the problem here. So, my research explored the hypothesis that Western astronomers need to develop a framework of cultural competence for working with Indigenous peoples. Some Western astronomers that are building astronomical facilities on Indigenous lands seem to be culturally incompetent, which is a serious issue. This includes training in Indigenous cultural competency for astronomical organizations to develop policies, protocols, methods, and practices, then overcome obstacles and shortfalls with astronomers approaching and working in collaboration with Indigenous communities. To accomplish this, I focused my study on the construction of astronomical facilities. on indigenous, on indigenous lands. So, cultural competence has the potential to improve astronomers' understanding of indigenous perspective, culture, and connection to the land and sky. This can be of mutual benefit to both indigenous people and astronomers. To prove this theory, I explored the qualitative methodology research to compare the indigenous cultural competence of two specific case studies. So, my first case study, it's a 30-meter telescope, the so-called TMT, which is considered the astronomy's next generation and biggest observatory in the world. Designed to incorporate a new technology called adaptive optics and will allow scientists to see deeper into space and observe cosmic objects and phenomena with unprecedented sensitivity. TMT scientists elected Mauna Kea, Hawaii's tallest mountain, as the best place in the world to build a telescope. The decision was made based on Mauna Kea's dark sky from lack of light pollution, clear air, good weather, almost equatorial location, good astronomical seeing, low humidity, high altitude, and places its summit above 40% of the Earth's atmosphere. The problem is that even though Mauna Kea seems to be the ideal site to build TMT, the mountain is also land protected by the Historic Preservation Act, meaning that Mauna Kea is a sacred site to Kanaka Maoli peoples, especially the top of the mountain, where TMT scientists are willing to build a telescope. So this land is a sacred center, a place of unique spiritual connection between Kanaka Maoli and their ancestors, a site that plays an integral role in Hawaii's water cycle as they collect water from its summits to ceremonies and healing. It is in many ways a living temple, a site of numerous shrines and ceremonies, and above all, and most importantly, this mountain is an important burial ground. So, also an impact study performed by NASA in 2007 also concluded that the 13 telescopes built so far in Mauna Kea has caused significant, substantial, and adverse damage to the mountain. The TMT project is not culturally competent. Therefore, its timeline was severely compromised and construction of the telescope is already late. The project in Mauna Kea is too close to be considered a waste of time and money. Hawaiian indigenous people feel indignation about the land lease, which for them is not respecting the law. But most importantly, they think that this project is culturally destructive and that is impractical, offensive, and not inclusive, as we can see in this short movie. Let me see if I can.
ensure that everyone can pass through the road. So again, as everyone here who's blocking the roadway, please allow everyone to pass through their vehicles waiting to pass.
I asked that if any help has been put up with these gentlemen and bring them. He said it.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is my first case study, which I consider cultural incompetent. Sorry. On the other hand, I'm studying the Square Kilometre Array, SKA, which I consider much better culturally, in terms of cultural competence. So the Square Kilometre Array is an international project to build the world's largest radio telescope. The SKA explores the universe by detecting radio waves emitted by a wide range of objects. This is one of the largest scientific endeavors in the history. SKA project will be developed in 2 different indigenous lands, consulted from the beginning of the process and already fully approved by the indigenous communities, both of them. So the first one is in South Africa's Karoo region, and the second is in Western Australia, Murchison Shire. 2 of the most remote areas on Earth, and are chosen due to their unique atmospheric conditions above the desert sites and their radio quietness. Australian Aboriginal Yamaji and South African Sand people have unique ways to explain why the sky looks the way it does. Indigenous artists from both regions were invited by the SKA scientists to do paintings and other art representation based on their traditional stories about the night sky. The concept was named SKA Shared Sky and resulted in an exciting form of sharing knowledge. As we can see here.
In a remote part of the Midwest region of Western Australia, scientists and engineers are working to build part of what will be the largest telescope ever built, the Square Kilometre Array, or SKA. Inspired by the project, Indigenous artists from the region have been creating paintings and other art based on traditional stories about the night sky.
The Yamaji Art Centre's been painting about things in the sky for over a decade now, looking at contemporary stories and traditional stories. And some of the artworks that we've been painting in the Art Centre have been about the Milky Way and the EMU in the sky.
The EMU in the sky tells us the time to go looking for EMU eggs. My mum especially couldn't wait for the first EMU egg so she could make us a yummy cake.
My painting, my story is about the Seven Sisters and the Orion, where you see in the Milky Way there are 6 bright ones and 1 very pale, faint star. But within this particular star in itself is a constellation in itself. There are millions and millions of other stars, but we can't see them with the naked eye.
seven sisters are looking after the younger sisters, who is the faintest of them all. This is the one the warrior is chasing after because he wants to marry her, and the others protect her from him.
In my painting of the Southern Cross, there's a story about the birds living happily together out in the bush, and the story goes that the birds were getting on quite well with each other. But one day they had a disagreement, and the galahs were very angry with the other birds, and then all the other birds all grouped together and they chased the galahs, the big grey galahs, up into the sky, and they were changed into stars. And that's the story of the Southern Cross in Aboriginal folklore.
By visiting the site and exploring the night sky together, artists and astronomers have begun a journey of shared understanding. The scientists have gained new perspectives on the universe, and some of the artists have created new works inspired by the science of the SKA.
So it was a two-way thing between the scientists, SKA, all the visit out to Bellardi, and a different way of looking at the sky, and also sharing our stories with the SKA people and also with the rest of the world.
And the painting that I did is Jupiter and 10 moons. I painted this after hearing that Jupiter has 10 moons because when I look through the telescope I can see at least 2 moons on each side. This inspired me to do this painting.
To watch the sky is really important for us because it's a continued tradition from our very old people right through us today in this time that we're living.
For thousands of years, people have looked to the night sky for answers to our most fundamental questions. By looking further than ever into the unknown, the SKA project will contribute to our collective knowledge about the universe and its mysteries. In a remote part of the middle.
Okay. So, by showing interests in finding collaborative ways of working, respecting the culture, but also accepting the fact that Indigenous peoples have relevant knowledge about the sky, SKA scientists found the best way to relate with the owners of the land that they intend to use for the implementation of their scientific projects. In conclusion, the SKA project is a good example of how cultural competence in action has the power to bring different communities together. So I've tried to do a comparison and analysis between the two case studies, and my research goal was to make a comparison between the astronomers versus Indigenous peoples' discourses around the TMT and the SKA, and how these discourses are reproduced and transformed, which are becoming dominant and marginalized. So, my method was very simple. I did a qualitative methodology research based on critical discourse analysis. 38 text samples were collected for the analysis of discourse related of the SKA project, and 38 text samples in the context of the TMT. The data was gathered randomly to analyze trends and patterns, and codes were defined and used in the same way in the two case studies. 4 types of texts were collected and analyzed: written texts, oral texts, audiovisual texts, and hypertexts. The texts are from Indigenous people in general, journalists, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, Western astronomers, Indigenous astronomers, academics, both non-Indigenous and Indigenous, activists, scientists from different fields, and politicians. So here we have 2 good examples. So I was looking for words, like strong words, in this case negative words, fear, anger, failures, disbelief, or, for instance, this, we are all born of all things. You did not include us in your project. Why? This is our home. So this was the kind of examples. This is for SKA, and as you can see, the words are more kind and positive. It was a two-way thing between the scientists, or for example, that sort of changing and swapping of knowledge inspire us to look at each other's differently. Or, for example, it's really important to build local relationships, etc. So, here's some data findings. I use different, Okay, so I use some different codes. So the code red for negative words or phrases, the code green for positive words or expressions, the code blue for words or expressions related to culture, and the code purple for negative, explicit or implicit words or phrases related with culture. So as you can see, it's very clear that the TMT research findings are very negative and the SCA research findings are positive. So let me just go a little bit here. So yeah. Analyzing the findings on code green, I discovered that peoples directly or indirectly related or merely opinionative on the topic are mostly more positively inclined towards the SKI, the SKI, when comparing with the trend regarding the TMT. So 59 words or phrases applied in speech and written texts about the SKI can be considered positives, as in the TMT collected findings, only 13 green code words or phrases were found. This is just an example. In the case of the code red, the negative sentences, I found the TMT was that they were found and coded as red in the 38 text samples collected, and for the TMT 42, and for the SKI a little bit less. And so the code blue results are also evident. 12 samples of text about culture were collected in the TMT case study, while in the SKA's research 20 samples were found. But the best result was the code purple, where I found 20 samples collected for TMT, while for SKA only 1 example, which is very, very interesting. Because the code purple is perhaps the one who confirms more effectively the hypothesis of my thesis. The purple code of this research confirms that a large number of texts are being produced orally and written for TMT, including negative words or phrases related with culture, either scientific culture or indigenous culture. 20 samples were collected for TMT, while for SKA only 1 sample was gathered. The more obvious conclusion here is that the culture topic is an adverse one in TMT. These research findings are not favorable to TMT external image as an astronomy project, as well as harmful to astronomers in the process and also to astronomers in general, due to the fact that this will be the most powerful optical telescope in the world, and consequently this makes it the more mediatized one as well. And above all, these numbers are adverse to Hawaiian indigenous peoples, who are seen as protesters by ones and protectors by others. This shows that culturally destructiveness is a negative phenomenon that is profoundly affecting both Hawaiian astronomers and indigenous communities. To conclude, comparing these two astronomy projects, both developed in indigenous lands, the SKA project is more culturally competent. TMT failed in the best ways to deal with culture, Indigenous peoples, sacred sites, understanding and acceptance. Cultural competence is needed here. Much more is to be codified, analyzed, and further discussed in the light of the collected data of this qualitative research. I believe this is just the tip of the iceberg. I would like to finish this talk with a powerful message in the context of the TMT project that I believe represents all Indigenous people's understanding of what should be a respectful encounter between them and the Western astronomers in their lands. Hawaiian Rios is one of the youngest and most powerful Indigenous involved in the TMT protests. To carefully listen to her speech is not just a question of cultural competence enhancement. Most importantly, listen to her is a question of respect.
Thing that you hear, research, talk to the people before you make your conclusions, before you make decisions. I'm speaking to everyone, community members, before you make your decision about this particular issue, come, speak with us. We are more than willing to have this conversation from the heart, from the soul, from the womb, from the water. We are willing. Please talk with us. Get to know us and get to know why we care so much about this place. Get to know us, because when you get to know us, you get to know where we come from. And where we come from is a beautiful, sacred land. Where we come from is of the infinite, divine. It's who we are. This mountain is who we are. This mountain has raised us. We're lucky to be alive and lucky to know that, because it's a beautiful time to be alive. So I'm asking you to come and join us and have this conversation and feel the land and let the land help you to come back into who you are. Let the land help you to decide what your stance is on this particular issue. You can listen to the words for days and days. You can read for days and days. But when you go up to the land and let the land speak to your heart and to your soul, then that's when you know. And so, come and stand with us. Come and join us. Bring your 4,000, 40,000, 400,000. Bring them with you and let us unite in all realms. All realms. And may you know that you are infinite and you are born of all things. From my heart to your heart, Kilahani. From my bowl to your bowl, Kilahani. From my water to your water, Kilahani.
So I think after this, I think we all know or should know that it's all in our hands. Thank you so much.